Yo, 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 visualize shark takes, hit the wave grinding. In the chat, gun shark odds make it rhyming. Sunday vibes, smooth bets, no confining. Acts engaged, can't stop us from shining. Bet on the spread, liking it, keep it tight. Push the odds further, jack on the hindsight. Odds fellows mind grasping the right sight. Hats, caps on heads, winners in plain sight. Hit the light, get in the chat, feel the flow, cash it, every dollar see the bank roll. Sunday grinding picks, now you gotta know. Extra points on the screen, sharp minds always glow. Big parlays, predictions we hold. Standing tall, betting knowledge all.
On a suddenly not so casual 7-point sharp Sunday, it is NFL, the extra points, the big show. The gun is in the house with the odds fellow. It is the Shark, and we are here live on Sharky Waters Nation. NFL Week 2, a bounce back week, a lot going on. Odds fellow, first time on the show. Guns, what's going on, brother?
Hey, listen, I didn't do too bad. I went 1-1-1 last week. Of course, getting that push where I should have got the win over the Seattle. But I digress. I move on to the next week. I am ready. We have an elite card and a lot of alignment on this one this week, so I can't wait to get into the banter, get into the chat. Week 2, baby. Let's get it.
Odds fellow, welcome to the broadcast.
Good to be back. I'll be in and out the first couple of weeks, then we'll hit our groove, and you guys will see me the rest of the season. I'm coaching some flag football. Got some frustration to let out because we are 0-2. We are not going 0-2 today. So let's have a little fun. Week 2 and 3, kind of my favorite looks at some of those bounce back, buy low, overreaction spots. So a lot to get into.
Yeah, without question. I think we saw some pretty egregious outcomes last week, and I think we're going to see a lot of bounce back and reverse. So week 1 to week 2, historically, massively polarized. And starting in Baltimore, 1 o'clock here, Raiders traveling across coast, road back-to-back sequence for the Raiders. This is the only game that we all align on, and we will open up the broadcast, sending it to the gun, Baltimore, first half, -5.5.
Yeah, make sure you get into the chat. Let me drop your plays in here, props, anything you want. Let's talk about every single angle on this beautiful week 2. But let's talk about this game, Las Vegas versus Baltimore. M&T Bank Stadium, right up the road from Guns Picks. Baltimore, Maryland, 1 p.m. is the kick. Listen, Baltimore coming off a close loss by a toe last Thursday, 27-20, despite winning the net yardage battle plus 99 net yards for the game. You have the Raiders, really didn't play that well last week, losing 22-10 to their division rival, the LA Chargers. -20 net yards for the game, -3 turnover ratio was a deciding factor, however. Baltimore is going to want to establish the run in this game, and they do it very well. 5.8 yards per carry last week versus KC, and you looked at the Raiders. What did they struggle against? Stopping the run versus the Chargers, allowing 6.5 yards per carry versus the Chargers last week. I think this is going to be a trend for them moving on in the season. Baltimore 4-2 ATS last season as a home favorite, 9-4 ATS as a single-digit favorite in 2023. But I want to break this down into a half because I think Baltimore, when you see their performances, especially coming off a loss in 2023, they turned up in the first half. If you look at their performances off losses, they lost to Indianapolis. The next week they go and they beat Cleveland in the first half, 21-3. They lost to Pittsburgh. Next week played Tennessee, where the score after the first half was 18-3. They lost to Cleveland. The next week they go play Cincinnati, and the score was 21-10 after the first half. So 4 losses last season. They're 4-0 ATS in the first half by an average margin of victory, 14.6 points per game. Also, you got to look at Baltimore. Just looking at the full game, 13-6 ATS after a loss since 2021 for the Ravens. So I think this is going to be a motivational factor. Baltimore coming off that primetime loss on Thursday night. You got extra rest there, too, for the Ravens. That's another beneficial factor. So give me Baltimore here in the first half, -5.5 as the play.
The odds fellow alignment first half, Baltimore -6 on your figure.
Yeah, so hopefully we don't get the push there, some late line movement because I was a little bit later getting to it. But look, at the end of the day, it's everything Guns laid out. This is a matchup play. This is a home play. This is a rest play. You got the team coming from the West Coast back to the East Coast. You do have the added day rest, like we said. And you have a Baltimore team that's going to come out and be hungry, right? They were a little bit slow to get start last week in that opener, and that's a tough spot, tough look. I actually thought they would come out and kind of get ahead on the Chiefs and then have the Chiefs playing catch up. It was opposite last week, and that's not typical of this Harbaugh-led Ravens team, especially under the Lamar regime. So you look at this combo, right? Lamar and Harbaugh. they're coming out in the first half. They're going to establish the run the way they want to. And I just don't think the coaching and the matchup and the talent, it's just not there for the Raiders. Now, can the Raiders hang around late? Can they maybe do something in garbage time? Sure. This one could get away fast, and I think that starts in the first half and tees up with what Graham's looking at, Sharks looking at for the full game.
Yeah, without question. My first official of week 2, Baltimore -8. You guys said a ton of the things I was going to say, so I'll just jump off it very briefly. As Guns mentioned, this team has been great in the bounce back, 13-6 since 2020 or 21. But I think even more importantly in recent history, where Lamar Jackson has taken his quality as a leader up significantly. They were 4-0 ATS last year off an outright loss. So if they lose, they come back with massive focus and energy. And I think probably not coincidentally for this cap, the home opener last year, actually, they laid a very similar figure to Houston, -9.5, and did beat Houston in that game 25-9. I think at that point in time, people didn't take that win as seriously as probably they should have, because people were not expecting Houston to be a playoff team last year. So when you see them beat Houston last year by 16 on this figure, I think you're going to hover right in that range. And those 4 bounce back wins last year were by an average of 17.8 points per game, as you guys suggested. And truthfully, it doesn't get much worse than this for the Raiders. You have to play the Harbaugh brothers in back-to-back weeks on the road. These are 2 of the best coaches in the league. They play an incredibly physical style. And the Raiders got their ass beat last week at SoFi Stadium. And there's no reason it shouldn't happen again here. And I talked about this last week before we faded them last week, the Raiders, that is. Last year, people seemed to fall in love with Antonio Pierce and this whole environment after he took over for Josh McDaniels. Antonio Pierce and the boys were 7-2 ATS last year, but those covers were incredibly fraudulent against the Giants, Jets, a game against the Chargers with Easton Stick, and a couple others. And this is going to be a brutal spot. I think people like Gardner Minshew to a certain degree. He's been scrappy, obviously, throughout his career, but you saw it last week. This Oakland offense is not explosive in the least. 3-way collab, I'm on the game -8. And the 2 dogs left and right of me, -5.5 and -6 in the first half. Guns picks, next official, 49ers on the road, laying 4.5 points at Minnesota. You're taking the dog here. The market's been all over it all week. This opened at 6.5. Minnesota +4.5 an official.
Yeah, I think the number's still good. It's sitting at 4.5 right now. Let's talk about this game here. Minnesota coming off that nice win versus Carolina. I'm sorry, the New York Giants. +92 net yards in that game, sacking Daniel Jones 5 times, by the way. They were just pressuring him all day long. Then you have San Francisco coming off a nice little Monday Night Football win versus the highly touted New York Football Jets with Aaron Rodgers back in the saddle. But they crushed them, putting up 401 yards of total offense. This was a top 5 defense last year, folks, for the Jets. +35 net yards, +2 turnover ratio, just absolute domination on both sides of the ball. Both defenses, like I said, played very well last week. You have San Francisco held the Jets to 19 points with that, including a garbage touchdown towards the end. And then 266 yards of total offense, 198 yards passing. Then you have Minnesota held Giants to 6 points, 220 yards of total offense. San Francisco just really abused the ground game. That's what they took advantage of with the Jets last week. 4.7 yards per carry, which they shouldn't be able to get away with versus this Minnesota defense. Their front was really good, top 10 in stopping the run last year, and they were 3rd in opponent rushing yards per play. So I think they're not going to be able to get away with this like they did last week. And then you have San Francisco and Minnesota played last year, and Minnesota beat them 22-17. And San Francisco was -2 turnover ratio, -127 net yards, which was their worst performance in 2023 statistically. So I think Minnesota just may have this San Francisco 49ers team number. San Francisco, a little bit of a sandwich spot, too, if you want to look at the situational play. Coming off that big win, highly touted New York Jets team on Monday Night Football, primetime win. And then you got to go on the road to go play Minnesota, 1 o'clock. And then who do you got next week? You got your divisional rival, a team that's played you very close historically, the LA Rams on the road. Both teams did score a bit, 28 points for Minnesota 32 last week, so I do lean towards the under on this one. I just think there's a due for some regression, especially with two better defenses they're going against this week. I just think this is the perfect spot here for Minnesota to go get the win. There's a reason why the line moved down to 4.5 here. And I'm going to be going with Minnesota as a play here. Minnesota plus 4.5 is my spot.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree necessarily with this. As you mentioned, a total trap game. You get a primetime game, and then you got to go out to Minnesota before you play a divisional opponent. But the one thing that I had written down here, which I think is an interesting conversational point for this game, is Sam Darnold legit? And I think he could fit this mold of these quarterbacks that are top picks with a franchise that kind of does them dirty. They bounce around a little bit. People forget about them. This guy's still only 27 years old. He could easily catch on with this franchise and be their franchise quarterback for 7 to 10 years. We're not saying that's necessarily going to happen with J.J. McCarthy coming back next year, but he certainly looked great in the opener at the Giants. And I really think this coach, Kevin O'Connell, is an underrated coach. He gets his flowers within the league, but I think nationally, Minnesota is still a small market. You don't turn on ESPN and see people talking about this guy left and right. He's a very good coach. And I think that's what Darnold has been missing in his career. And I think you're going to see a continued efficiency point from Darnold here today. And I think that's why you're seeing significant steam here on Minnesota. Guns picks plus 4.5, an official. Throwing it to Anthony Latino here. The Jets on the road on a back-to-back scenario going to the Titans. This is an alignment play with myself. First half minus 2.5 New York Jets.
Yeah, look, and we talked about it in the pregame a little bit, and we've been in contact with each other. This is not necessarily the Jets and the Rodgers-led offense, because that worries me a little bit. I think the talent's there. You saw flashes of that on that one drive against San Francisco. But similar to the Baltimore spot, right? This one really less so about rest or home and away. This is about a pissed-off team with a lot of talent that's highly touted that's going to come in here and get the job done in the first half. I think there's too much pride and too much talent on both sides of the ball. But what I'm really want to key in on is that Jets defense. They got run all over, and Tennessee is not going to be able to establish the run in the same way. This is not the Mike Vrabel, Derrick Henry-led Titans of years past, right? They did come out and they played actually a little bit better, especially in the first half, and then kind of things for Will Levis and that offense started to fall apart. I think you're going to see more of what you saw in the second half against a defense in the Jets that is actually better than that defense in the Bears, and they made the Bears in the second half look like all-world, all-pro defense. So I think, if I only need 3 points here, right, 2.5, 3 is where that line's fluctuated. I think we'll get the field goal. I think we'll get the touchdown. I think you're going to see a Jets 7 to 10 point lead because of that anger factor, because of that pride. Rodgers is a leader, right? As much as I don't disagree with a lot of the shit he says and the way he kind of goes about doing things, he's going to come in and have that team ready. But the real key here is what that defense is going to do. It's going to bottle up Will Levis. It's going to force him to throw the ball against better corners than the Chicago Bears have. They're not going to be able to run the ball. And, I'm good. 3 points. 3 points is all we need. Just a field goal, baby.
Yeah, completely agreed here. I'm on the first half at minus 2.5 as well. And just jumping off of what Anthony said, I think this is really where we opened the broadcast saying we're expecting a significant reversal from week 1 to week 2. Well, both of these teams last week, I think, are going to see the opposite. And I think it is situational to the team quality they're playing. I mean, the Jets played probably the best team in the sport on the road to open on Monday Night Football. Came out reasonably well. Actually took a 7-3 lead in the first quarter before giving it back in the second quarter, but nonetheless did not cover the first half. So we expect them to come out with renewed focus specifically early to get ahead of the Titans. And as Anthony mentioned, last week Tennessee really took advantage of Caleb Williams in his first start to go up 17-0 on the road. We expect that to reverse coming home as well. And we talk about this oftentimes in all sports, to be honest. The nature of a loss. Do you bounce back, or are you to a certain degree demoralized? That was a demoralizing loss for the Titans last week. The Titans dominated that game and really gave it away with a special teams touchdown and a pick six late, really an egregious one from Levis, kind of throwing a shovel pass across the field for a pick six. And when I was going through this, I actually found this to be quite interesting. Will Levis in his career, albeit small at home, is actually 4-0 ATS in the first half. So theoretically, you can say, why are you fading this guy if he's that good? It's very situational to who he played last year. He caught Atlanta with Taylor Heineke at quarterback. He caught Carolina. We know how poor Carolina has been in the Bryce Young era here. And he caught two divisional quarterbacks, backups, Gardner Minshew and Case Keenum when CJ Stroud was hurt for Houston late season. So that is the ultimate level of fool's gold there at 4-0 in the first half. And as Anthony mentioned, this Jets defense should bottle up Levis and be really focused here. And final point on this, the Jets actually do have a short week going into week 3. They play Thursday Night Football against the Patriots. I think psychologically, you want to get out ahead of this team who you're clearly better than, so you don't have to really grind 60 minutes because you're going to have to get back up in 3 or 4 days to play another game. So it's what you oftentimes see in basketball in the front end of a back-to-back. Team comes out super hot, hopefully to take the team out of the game so they don't have to really grind the full game. So all over this in the first half, -2.5. This is the only disagreement play of the broadcast. I had the egregious Giants hat on last week, and they laid probably one of, if not the worst performances of week 1 on the table. An egregious 28-6 loss to Minnesota. But the Gun believes in this team, surprisingly. Gun's picks taking the Giants on the money line at +108.
You want to get gross? Let's get gross because this game is gross.
Dirty, muddy, dirty. Let's do it.
But I love playing in the mud. I love taking these games, and I'm going to be on the Giants here. I just think this is an astounding line, knowing the history between these two teams. Giants just underperformed last week, no question about it. 28-6 -92 net yards for the game. They just got Danny Dimes got sacked with a rebuilt line. By the way, that line didn't work at all 5 times. Then you have Washington underperformed as well, 37-20 to Tampa, -93 net yards. So basically, in my opinion, granted, Washington did score a few more points because Jaden Daniels can actually move his feet and run the ball, but he didn't do anything impressive in the passing game. Both of them basically just stunk. You have the Giants look bad last week, like I said, but these teams inside the division, Giants have just performed well. 14-2 ATS last 2 seasons versus divisional opponents. 5-1 ATS run as an away dog versus divisional opponents. So inside the division, it is okay to tail the Giants. Also got to look at Washington. 2-8 ATS as a home favorite versus divisional opponents. 0-3 ATS as a home favorite last season. And 0-5 ATS at home versus divisional opponents last year. So you have a team that plays well in the division, ATS perspective, of course. And then you have a Washington team that underperforms in the division historically. Also, look at the Giants. Every time they play Washington, guess who has their number? The New York Football Giants. 8-2 straight up in ATS versus Washington last 10 meetings. And the home team is 3-7 ATS last 10, 4-8 straight up in that sample size. Washington has also covered 5 straight versus Washington, all as a dog, winning outright. So, yeah. I'm trend-oriented here. I know that. I just think that the stock has completely plummeted with the Giants. It is time to go buy that stock back, at least for this week. Give me the Giants here. Money line +108 is the play.
Anthony Latino, disagreement. Washington -1.5.
Don't forget who the head coach of the Washington football team Commanders is. Ladies and gentlemen, my former defensive coordinator, the Dan Quinn. Now, do I trust Dan Quinn with the lead? Do I trust Dan Quinn in the Super Bowl? Hell no. But Dan Quinn against the Giants. Let's recap some of these matchups. 21-6, 23-16, 28-20, 40-0, 49-17. Now, that was a Dan Quinn-led defensive scheme with very different players and maybe different talent. But you have a Washington Commanders team that is coming home under new ownership, under a new coach, under a new regime. That stink of Dan Snyder is gone. That Dan Quinn era, the rebuild, will he get there? We don't know. But I think he's going to get the win today because it doesn't matter what the trends are. We're actually looking at the regression here and what's going to happen. I just think you're going to have a Washington team at home that's finally going to get clicking. I do think they have a little bit more to offer here. I like the Jaden Daniels piece of the puzzle because I do think he can get going against that Giants defense. One thing I'm banking on a little bit is that Washington Commanders front. It actually got pretty good pressure, 67% pass rush win rate per ESPN last week. That was good for second in the league. They need to get after that Giants offensive line and cause problems for Danny Dimes. So there's been some changes, right? Obviously the stats, the trends matter. If you were going to back the Giants, everything Guns laid out is true. it's really the only team in the NFC East that Dimes and the Giants and Dable have done well with, against the last few years. But I do think you have a different era here beginning in Washington. And I think this big home game for them first, it's not a bad teaser, like, too. Just to touch on that, I'd be comfortable teasing either one of these teams. I do think the line is telling here. I do think you're going to have a close game, probably in the field goal mix. But at home, with Dan Quinn, knowing, again, that Giants matchup as well, I think you're going to get a different effort here from Washington. That's what I'm hanging my hat on. So give me the -1, -1.5. If you're more comfortable with it on the money line, I think you're good up to 2. That 2 to 3 point spread is one thing to watch, just with the extra points. Now the kickoff throwing some wrinkles into this. But at 1.5, I'm good. And I think Commanders get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the game is incredibly interesting. I'm obviously not on the side, but I had question marks on both. And I think the key point with the Giants really is this group just a disaster? You saw this on a Hard Knocks offseason. They were, debating whether they should get rid of Saquon Barkley, whether they should go all in on Daniel Jones. They already kind of did go all in on him, giving them a 4-year extension for egregious money. But it's more so the idea that they're really letting him take the put his hands on the wheel, if you will. But I think last week was very noteworthy because that was a home opener. New York crowd was live and ready to go. Sam Darnold came out, I believe, 11 for 11 throwing against them. The defense was a sieve. The offense was horrendous. And this brings me back to a continuous point here with these ex-Belichick coordinators and coaches, Brian Dable being one of them. There is not one Belichick ex-coach that has ever succeeded as a professional coach. And I think these guys are just assistants, and they need to be under the umbrella of a bigger energy and probably a smarter energy, and that certainly is Bill Belichick. And I think this Giants team could be totally psychologically fractured. And as Anthony mentioned, which I think is very important, the Giants have dominated this series, going 32-14-1 straight up since the year 2000. And Danny Dimes is 5-1-1 against Washington. But the key point, those 5 covers came against Jay Gruden. Who knew? I forgot he even coached this team. Bill Callahan coached them for 1 year. And, of course, Ron Rivera the last few years. This is going to be a different environment. Washington is rebooted, new quarterback, new running back, new scheme, everything. I don't really have a side, but I really am worried about the Giants here today. So the gun on the Giants, not worried at all. And Anthony on Washington. My next play, we're going to Carolina. 1 o'clock in Charlotte, taking the Chargers on the road at -4.5, 1 unit. This is a continued buy team. You guys know this, having watched us now for 4 or 5 years. We don't usually trend buy teams, but I think when you find a team like the Chargers, who were so far below their mean and their expectancy last year, this is a team that's going to go on a run. And I think you saw it start last week in the division. They were not particularly good in the first half scoring the ball. They woke up in the fourth quarter, and now they come on the road to a Carolina team, which I actually see people buying on X. And I got to be honest with you guys, I certainly get a buy low and potentially a bounce back off a blowout last week in New Orleans, but I don't see it with this group. And I think it's going back to psychology. We were just talking about the Giants, but I said this on the broadcast last week. I don't think this coach, Dave Canales, is really the big energy guy this team needs. And Bryce Young, notably undersized, notably quiet, shy, not a great leader. Dave Canales is not a big, brash, Dan Campbell type of guy who's going to bring the energy out of this kid. And truthfully, I think Bryce Young might be a complete bust at that number 1 pick last year. Carolina is 4-12-1 ATS in their last 13 games. And I think go back to last year, 3 very specific home games where they were an underdog, where I believe people were buying them last year too to kind of bounce back and show improvement. They were catching 4.5 points against Minnesota last year and lost by 8. They were catching 10.5 against Dallas at home and lost by 23. And they were catching 5.5 against Tampa Bay in the final week of the season and did lose the game 9-0. This Chargers team last year lost 5 games by 3 points or less. They're a bye team. Herbert is elite. Harbaugh is potentially, top 3 coach in the league. Love the Chargers to continue their upward movement here and really dominate this Carolina team. Guns picks, comment.
You're right. I mean, the Panthers suck. They're bad. They couldn't even put up 200 yards of total offense yesterday, -2 turnover ratio in their first game. But I just wanted to bring this stat up, and it was a great trend. I want to credit Brian Power to Wager Talk. He brought this up on his Power 5 show last 20 years, coming off a loss of 35 points or more, the team is 50, 18, and 2, 73.5% hit rate in their next game. It's just a trend. Panthers are doo-doo, but seeing that line at 4.5, I got to disagree. This is weird. I'm not playing it. I'm not playing it because the Panthers are ass. And sometimes it's just like the trends sometimes hit and it doesn't make any goddamn sense. This could be one of them here. I tell you what, I'm not putting the Chargers on my survivor pick, that's for sure. But the cap's a cap. But I'm just saying that there's some weird stuff going on with this line. Why isn't the Chargers a 7.5 point favorite? Why isn't it an 8 point favorite? Because like the Panthers are against the Raiders. That's where I kind of draw the line there. That's just my opinion.
No, I wouldn't disagree. I would just make a comment on that. Just historically in all sports, books don't really move the line that wildly. You still have to remember this is a Chargers team that didn't make the playoffs last year. So you're never going to see a non-playoff team laying a touchdown on the road. I mean, it's very rare. So it's more so just like understanding that sports books are not going to jump a line in like a one-off matchup from like a pick'em to like -9. Like Baltimore is so well credentialed in this era. That's why they get that big line. I mean, like even you look at a team like Dallas, who was just elite last year at home, only laying 6.5 to the Saints today. It's pro football. The gaps aren't as big. So I think let it be what it is. I think it's actually a pretty big line. But I just want
to bring an argument to both sides. Yeah. It's not like I like I said, I ain't touching the Panthers.
50, 18, and 2 or whatever you said is obviously a huge trend. I'd always be curious to go through that. It would take us hours to see who covered and who did it situationally. But I would be curious to see who the 50 were and who the 18 were, and obviously see if there was some sort of trend within the trend as to who didn't cover and whatnot there. But I'm going to be on the Chargers probably almost every week this year, at least until week 8 or 10, because I think they're really sustainable.
I got their win total over, so every win counts for me on that one.
And I do think a big reason you see that number not moving a ton or feeling as big as you might see a 7 to 10, right? That we're kind of used to, or these double-digit spreads when you get some of these lopsided matchups. Carolina may get there in some of their games. Like don't not expect to see that because of the way that team is structured and the way they look. But this is a Chargers team too, and I'm playing the under, which kind of plays right into this. They kicked 4-5 field goals, I think, last week, right? They battled. It was 7-6 at halftime against the Raiders. The Raiders, who I think an Antonio Pierce-led team, a little bit better defensively in that defensive identity. Obviously, that's kind of how that game played out. And then the Chargers just kind of kept grinding them down. It was messy, right? 22-10. That was 32 points here. I'm going low, and this is a low total on the board. You look at Carolina on the other side of things. They scored one touchdown, and that was in the third quarter when the game was already out of hand. One field goal for them in the first half. Couldn't get anything going offensively, and they were down 30-3 at halftime. Like I said, that lone touchdown in the third quarter, they lose 47-10. You have a Chargers team that only put up 22 points, albeit, like I said, against a slightly better defense in Vegas. When you look at this for Carolina, that, obviously some of this is weighted based on what happened in week 1, but New Orleans now the second ranked defense DVOA wise, the Chargers sitting right there at 5. And you have that type of identity, right? They're going to muck it up too. The Chargers are going to want to run the ball. They're banged up offensively. They don't really have the wide receiver depth. Herbert was one of the most disappointing players I saw in week 1 because of the identity, I think, and the way Harbaugh wants to play the game. So I'm fine going under here. I think you're going to have a lot of running the ball. You're going to have a lot of short fields. You're going to have a lot of field goals, not a lot of red zone efficiency. I think this is where you get some similarities to the identities of the team from week 1. And that's why you're kind of sitting here with this game this way. So I think, what do I have it at? 30, that's 38.5, right?
It's 38.5 right now. I'm saying.
Yeah. So 38.5, which, ideally you would have been over 39, but I think the market's moved it a little bit. So I'd grab it now before that thing dips any lower.
Yeah, 100%. So 2 officials in that game run 4.5 for the Chargers and under 38.5. My next official at 1 o'clock, going to New England, Gillette Stadium, 1 o'clock, taking the Seahawks at -3. And this is really going back to that week 1 to week 2 reversal idea again. New England won outright last week at +9.5 and disrupted survivor pools everywhere in the world. Nobody saw that coming. We did say on this broadcast, be careful with Cincinnati. We were right. But one of the things that I think is very important here is you have to ask yourself, was that really a game where New England went in there and won the game? Or was that just because Cincinnati was so utterly terrible? And sometimes you can win, not because you're great, but because the opponent is so bad. And they really were. And Cincinnati just looks totally disrupted every season in week one and the early weeks. So I don't think this is really a quality point of New England. I think it was just Cincinnati. And if you look at the box score last week, outside of Ramondre Stevenson running for over 100 yards, the Pats did nothing on offense. Jacoby Brissett, it could do nothing. This team is totally one-dimensional. And you find a nice buy low on Seattle here, who actually did get backdoored at home last week against Bo Nix and Denver to push or not cover, depending on if you got -6 or -6.5. But if you really go through that game, Seattle dominated the game, outgained them by almost 100 yards, forced 3 turnovers, had a significant lead, 26-13 until a late touchdown around 2 minutes in the fourth quarter. Total garbage touchdown backdoor. So you're getting a buy low where Seattle did not cover. New England covered. You get another sketchy quarterback situation. As I mentioned, Seattle defense did take care of Bo Nix last week. And this is the ex-defensive coordinator out here from the Ravens. This team is legit, and they will function great here. Final point on this. Last year, and I looked this up because I was a little worried, it's an early kick time on the East Coast for this team. They were favored, Seattle, that is, 2 times on the road last year outside of the division on Eastern time. Once at the Giants, -1.5. They hammered the Giants 24-3. And another one, -2.5 late season at Tennessee, cover 20-17. So Seattle traveling here with Geno Smith, early time, doesn't seem to matter. And I think they will take care of business here at Gillette at 1 o'clock. Official play, -3. A couple other 1 o'clock games here we want to discuss. We're going to go to the home fan on this broadcast, as we always do. When we don't have an official on this game, we see the hat. Anthony, what are the fans thinking about the Cowboys today?
I think it's a potential letdown spot that you have to be prepared for, right? I never love going into the Dome, but on paper, talent, they should walk all over the Saints, right? It's another opportunity for them, I think, and what's going to be a tough year against a tough schedule. They're coming off the division win, so right away you get that division winner schedule. That's going to make things a little bit messier. The Eagles got better, even if the Commanders and Giants didn't necessarily take a step up in the division. You really need to win some of these low-hanging in-conference, out-of-division games, and that's what the Cowboys need to do. Now, the one thing I'll be happy about, and I think the fans are happy about, they got the contract bullshit cleaned up, right? They got these guys signed. They got these guys in, even if there's a little bit of, potential noise or risk with McCarthy. The guys in the locker room do still seem to believe in each other. And I think what you're going to get is another good defensive effort. And what you just have to hope is that the offense is doing enough, right? The offense didn't look great even against Cleveland. I think a lot of that noise where I'd be worried as a fan is how bad is that Cleveland team? How bad is Deshaun Watson? And how good did that make Dallas look? But they got the win, and that's what matters. Here coming in, I don't love the number. A little bit of strength, as a fan, I'm a little bit afraid of it. Looking at the number itself, I think that does lean a little bit of strength for them to be in that type of favored position heading into New Orleans on a road game. I like it in a tease personally. It's probably the best spot to play it, or I wouldn't mind taking New Orleans.
Yeah, Guns, anything on this one?
Yeah, just a couple trends on this one. Dallas 6-2 in 2023 is a single-digit favorite and a home favorite for that matter. But I mean, you got to take that with a grain of salt. Who they play? I mean, they played the Jets, the New England Patriots, the Rams. They played Philly at home when they were a falling knife at the back end of the season. Detroit played them close. I was like, you got to take. They played some bad teams at home last season, but I mean, New Orleans in these positions historically have performed very well as an away dog. 26-12-2 since 2014 as an away dog. But then you compartmentalize that, take out the Drew Brees out of the element. 14-5-1 since 2018. This is kind of one of those teams that always seems to show up in these positions. But I don't want to take it on the spread here. I think Anthony hit it perfectly. Is just tease them up past the 7 and get them in like a 12, like a 12.5. Put them on a teaser card. I think that's probably the way you should play this game. And I would also put the Broncos on a teaser card, getting them past there, because there are some statistics that tell you that If you actually look at 2023 for Pittsburgh, they had 10 wins last season. Their average margin of victory was 7.4
Very tight.
points per game. Only one game was more than a possession that they won that. So if I were to make a teaser card on this one, I would take Denver and I would take the Saints on that one. That's how I'd play it.
Yeah, when I was looking at this, I originally thought, is this going to be another classic Dallas blowout against a non-playoff team, which was very, very consistent last year, early season at home. But as Guns mentioned, I think this Saints team is a bye team. If you guys remember, the Saints started last year, I believe, 1-4-1 ATS. They got backdoored a couple times. They just were very inefficient scoring the football, but they really did catch wind at the end of the season, almost made the playoffs. I believe they were tied with the best record in that division at 9-8, but lost the tiebreaker to the Bucks. So this is close to a playoff team. And you look at what the Giants did, or excuse me, the Cowboys did last year. As I mentioned, they started out really hot, but they did fade down the stretch, going 1-3 ATS in their last 3 home games. Of course, losing in the playoffs emphatically to Green Bay. And as Anthony mentioned, I'm not entirely sure we can read week 1 in any sort of clear way here. Was Cleveland just that bad? We don't know. And so therefore it kind of goes on that New England comment too. Is the opponent just so poor, or is Dallas really that good? I think this game's tough. I think that's why we don't have an official on it. So we don't really have a lean in this game. But Guns mentioned, obviously if you get it a teaser plus 12.5, probably a good look there. Another 1:00 game here, which has immense intrigue. Playoff rematch, 2x revenge game. Bucks on the road at the Lions. Lions obviously have been an ATS darling for us on this show for years. But we suspect the Lions might be hitting a bit of a market cap here. They're now well adjusted. The lines are bigger, and they are laying 7 or 8 points here against Baker and the boys. I'll throw it to Guns for some opening comments.
I kind of like Detroit in a survivor pick, to be honest with you. I think they can win this game, but 7.5 is a lot of points on this one. I went and looked at the box score because it brought me to that 2x revenge type of element there. But when we looked at the playoff game in particular, the game was a lot closer than what the box score was. I mean, it was basically Detroit dominated the game from start to finish, and it was a garbage touchdown that kind of brought it within a possession. So with Detroit coming off that Sunday night football win, I don't think the defense really played too well. I have a lot of questions with the secondary, especially how the Rams basically kind of abused them in the passing game in the second half, just running the ball, just moving the ball up and down the field. I felt like whoever won that coin toss in the overtime was just going to score a touchdown and win that game, and that's exactly what happened. But with Tampa, I'm just not going to be high on them all season long. I just think they're going to be one of those teams that are going to drop as far as the stock value goes. Losing Canales is going to affect them eventually. It didn't show it with Baker Mayfield. He played very well, 144 QBR rating, I think it was. Last week, so against Washington, so he did well, but this is going to be a different animal here, going in, playing Detroit, playing him at home, playing him in the spot you were at last year. Could the score go crazy and go up towards the over? Possibly. That'd probably be one take on this one. But I also like Detroit on a teaser because you can get them at a 1.5. Get them past the 3 and the 7. I kind of like that one as well. So that's good. That's probably a good team to put on a teaser card. I don't want to take them on the spread, though. Could be a real close one possession type of game, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Anthony, anything on this one?
No, just this is another one where I'd say line strength, right? You know, Shark mentioned it. We haven't really seen the books fully adjust like this on Detroit, and maybe they're starting to do that. I want to see how that plays out a little bit more. But if I was going to look, I think you do follow that line strength and you see what the bookmakers are doing.
Yeah. This was a tough one. I think this is a really sharp line. And Guns and I had actually talked about this off the air. But once this got steamed over a touchdown, I thought that this probably spoke to a Detroit win right around 7 points. So it's obviously sharp. But if you can get over 7.5 or 8, I do think the correct side here would be the Bucks. And it goes back to what we've been saying here, for the past couple of minutes about Detroit. Detroit was 13-3 ATS over a window spanning a couple seasons at home. And as I mentioned, we bought them numerous times in that window. But now, as they've gotten more adjusted, they are 4-3 last 7 ATS at home, right around 500. They got very fortunate to cover the game last week in overtime on a 4.5, 5.5 line. And that speaks to the potential sharpness of Detroit at home. And The motivation in this game 100% is with Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay last year in the regular season got beat by Detroit at home by 14, 20-6. And in the playoffs, 31-23 in Detroit. And there's your sharpness again. That was an 8-point win on a -6.5. So moral of the story is we think this is probably going to be right around a touchdown win on the long-term average. But if you can get it over 7, we would lean towards Tampa Bay in this game. So nothing official on that one, but conversation always wins. Next official at 1 o'clock, Anthony Latino, second under of this week. Indianapolis on the road at Green Bay. Green Bay without Jordan Love, a lot of moving parts, but you like the under officially.
Yeah, and I think that Jordan Love piece is a big part of it, right? I think don't sleep on how bad Malik Willis is and has been as a quarterback. When you peel the onion back on some of those Tennessee statistics and some of those Tennessee games, because he did start games for the Tennessee Titans, and they were ugly. I think coming out, right, you're just going to have a Brian LaFleur-led team that I do enjoy. Coach LaFleur, I think, knows what he's doing. But without Love and their leader there, I think they're going to have to lean on the run and a lot of bootlegs and scrambles even for Willis. They're going to try to get him in space and get him moving. Just things that are going to continue to chew up the clock, right? The Colts come in here. Now they had a little bit more of I think a buy low spot for me from a defensive standpoint, because a lot of people are saying, well, the Colts defense isn't very good, right? Are they just the same repeat as last year? They're a sieve, but I don't underestimate how good that Houston Texans offense is and what they were trying to do, right? They kind of got run all over, right? And that's really, I think, the way they played defensively, the scheme and what they were trying to take away from CJ Stroud and from a very dangerous passing attack. That allowed the Joe Mixon running back stable there to get going. Here, I think you have Green Bay, who's going to want to establish the run. I think Indy's going to do a little bit of a better job stopping it because they have less of that risk around CJ Stroud. I put 9-10 guys in the box every single time, right? So, I think a lot of people are going to react and say, well, the Colts gave up 29 points, right? They scored 27. Anthony Richardson had these huge, massive, explosive plays. I just think you have two defenses that are going to be able to take away and make this game a little bit one-dimensional on both sides. So I like it under 41, especially if 41 is a key total number to stay under that. I think you're going to see this game in the high teens on both sides.
Yeah, and I think, again, going back to the reversal week 1 to week 2 theme, you saw 2 overs last week between these teams. Green Bay in Brazil, 34-29, no defense in that game, just a funky environment. The foreign country, weird stadium. Yeah, the grass was terrible. So that obviously let the offenses run downhill as opposed to the defenses really kind of having trouble backpedaling. And the same thing with a divisional game in week 1 for Indianapolis. Tight loss, 56 total points against Houston. And now you see an underline. This is a super low total. It did open at 47, but that's because that was the Jordan Love line. The reopen, I believe, was at 42.5 or 41.5. And, regarding the game, I think this is a really difficult spot because the whole idea that the starter's not playing, this is not basketball where the team lets down because the starters are not playing. In football, if you have a backup quarterback, you're at an extreme deficit point, and that's why the line flipped by about a touchdown. This was actually Indianapolis plus 4.5 at open. So if you got plus 4.5, you're basically free rolling, you would think. Minus 2.5 could be sharp, but Guns picks, any comments?
I got nothing on this game. I ain't touching it. It's gross. And we'll see what happens with Malik Willis. God bless.
Yeah. Toss game, Anthony, on the under. And we do think the under is definitely the sharpest look in this game. Last game at 1 o'clock. Very interesting game here. I could not figure this game out. I believe Guns may have an angle on this game. Guns, I'll throw it to you first. Browns at Jaguars, both with bad losses last week. Browns just blown out. Jaguars really gave the game away with a Travis Etienne fumble at the goal line to lose late at Miami. But either way, both teams should be pissed off here, I would imagine. Guns, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you have two pissed off teams going into this one. Cleveland, your offense, I don't know. Deshaun Watson, are we gonna stop doing this experiment with them and move on? I don't know. I know they committed a ton of money, a guaranteed money for that matter, on him. and he just did not look great. Granted, he was going against the Dallas pass rush that was on him the entire game. You have a Jacksonville team that had a good pass rush as well. They got 3 sacks versus 2 last week, 8.1% sack rate. Jacksonville kind of performs well in these type of spots, especially at home. 4-2 ATS is the home favorite last year. 3-1 ATS is the home favorite of 3 points or less. 7-4 ATS as a favorite in 2023. And then you have Cleveland that just didn't perform well last season as an away dog. I lean towards the Jacksonville side on this one because I just think the Jacksonville loss hurt a lot worse than the Cleveland one. Granted, Cleveland got smoked, but that's a deflating thing to go take it back and try to, you lose your home game the way you did to a non-divisional opponent. Then you have to go on the road to Jacksonville. I think the motivational side to me would be on the Jacksonville side. Not an official play, but I lean towards Jacksonville -3.
Yeah, I have some comments. I'll throw it to Anthony, though.
No, nothing real. One trend I want to see, just if it continues from last year, is that Cleveland defense, which looked bad at home against Dallas. I think they were put in some tough spots against a good offensive team in the Cowboys. Put in some bad spots, meaning their defense really kept them or their offense rather, and Watson really kept them on the field. But one thing to look out for is that defense, as good as they were last year, they were terrible on the road. I want to see if that trend continues a little bit, or if this defense can get clicking and maybe put the team on their back. But they're probably 1-2 bad Deshaun Watson games away from maybe having to make a move and give up on this thing.
Yeah, without question. One of the things I thought was interesting looking at the box score of the Dallas game last week at Cleveland is both teams actually had 15 first downs. So it was a very similar game to what you saw recently on Thursday Night Football in Miami, where turnovers just completely flipped the game. That game could have been a lot tighter because Dallas didn't do a whole lot offensively in that game to get to 33 points. So the moral of the story there for me is that game probably should have been a lot lower than it was at 33-17 final. So I would expect the game to be lower from a Cleveland standpoint. But the Jacksonville game last week, which went under at Miami 20-17, Jacksonville actually gave up 400 yards.
Yep.
And somehow that went under. So Jacksonville games should go north in their point totals, and Cleveland should come down, which makes it actually very difficult to handicap. I think it probably falls somewhere in the middle. And I think just in terms of reading the line for the game at Jacksonville -3, very ambiguous. There's not a lot of matchup data here. I believe these teams haven't played in a couple years. And I think this is probably going to be a field goal game on average. And that's, of course, why it's -3.
To me, it's going to come. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I think it's just going to come down to, can Deshaun Watson take care of the football? I mean, that defense put up only allowed 265 yards of total offense to Dallas last week. It's not like the defense didn't do their job. They did their job. But the offense did not do their job with a -2 turnover ratio. And the passing, they only had 137 yards passing, 53.3% completion rate. They ran the ball very well, but Jacksonville can stop the run. They did well, 3.2 yards per carry given up to Miami last week. So if there's a weak point, like you said, Shark, it's passing game with Jacksonville. Because, I mean, granted, Miami has a pretty good offense in terms of passing. But if you're putting it, I would want to put it, if I was the defensive coordinator for Jacksonville, I would want to put it in Deshaun Watson's hand and say, try to beat us in the air, because you're not going to beat us on the run. So that's going to be my concern on this one. And seeing that line at -3, this could come down to, like you said, come down to a field goal, one side or the other. You either get a push or you get a cover on the Cleveland side.
Yeah, and Jacksonville is just a hard team to figure out. I think we actually kind of know who Cleveland is more than we know who Jacksonville is.
Correct.
If you even go back last year, of course, this is their home opener this season, but they were incredibly inconsistent and hard to predict last year at home. I'm just looking at it now. Their home opener last year, they took an 8-point loss to Kansas City where they couldn't do anything. They lost 17-9. And then they came back the following week in the division against Houston and got blown out by 20. Then they went to London and won 2 games in London. So it's like, this team should just move to London and go win over there. Like, what are we doing? And then they come back off the London trip, which I think we had talked about last year in that particular moment. We said this is a trap game for them coming back off of London. And they just inexplicably blew out Indianapolis 37-20. So the point is, like, they're very psychologically scattered. There's just not a lot of patterns with this team. And then, of course, you saw them completely fall apart down the stretch and lose, I believe, 5 out of their last 6 to miss the playoffs and not even win the division, where it looked like they were in complete control after week 12 at 8-3. So this team is just, I think they're poorly coached to a certain degree. I think Doug Peterson is a mediocre coach. Of course, he did win a Super Bowl with Philadelphia. We get it. But there's a lot of coaches. Jeff Fisher comes to mind, goes to a Super Bowl once, that doesn't do anything for 20 more years. It's just a lot of coaches that have one run in them and are perpetually mediocre. I think Doug Peterson makes some poor decisions. I think he's a bit of a riverboat gambler, too much. And I think ultimately there's a better coach for Trevor Lawrence, who I think has high upside in his career. So moral of the story, this game is incredibly difficult. We don't love Jacksonville. We don't love the coach. They're incredibly unpredictable across the board. 4 o'clock, smaller slate, 3 games, only official. Throwing it to Anthony, another under. Pittsburgh playing back-to-back road games. Went under last week at Atlanta, 18-10. Denver didn't do much on the road, scoring the football until a late touchdown and garbage backdoor, as we mentioned before, in Seattle. You like the under here? Talk to me.
Yeah, another team where you're riding the defense and you're riding a little bit of the matchup. Think about how Pittsburgh wants to play, right? Another thing I haven't talked about with all these totals is I think you have a lot of bad offenses in this league. You have a lot of bad quarterback play in this league. You forget that these guys are just starting to come into the rhythm in their own because the preseason has become an absolute joke, right? These guys are getting the most reps and the most work when they do these joint practices, these closed off joint practices where they're running some plays. I don't even know what the format is, but they're not suiting these guys up. A lot of that first team offense is not playing against a first team defense in the preseason, right? Even 1-2 games like they used to do, right? It's just a completely different format. So with Pittsburgh here, again, you have a team that wants to muck it up. They won 18-10 against what I think is actually a very good Atlanta Falcons offense. Now, maybe it's a Kirk Cousins issue. Maybe he's not healthy. He looked like a statue in the pocket. But 18-10, that game turned into a field goal fest. They took the ball out of Justin Fields' hand. If you look, they were not throwing the ball deep. They didn't want to because they know that they can rely on that defense and they can muddy things up. It's the Tomlin way. It's the Steeler way. And you're going to get a similar thing here in what they try to do against a rookie quarterback. You thought Kirk Cousins looked bad against a rookie quarterback. They're going to give Bo Nix fits, right? And as much as I have faith in Sean Payton in the long run, and maybe Bo Nix even gets there, this is going to be rough sledding for them early on, right? So from an offensive DVOA standpoint, Denver comes in ranked 3rd to last, right? They're sitting at 30th overall with the way they looked in week 1. Again, like I said, that Atlanta team sitting down at 24th, they looked better against that Pittsburgh-led defense. And one thing I think you can really key in on is these Pittsburgh Steelers, that defensive front led by TJ Watt, who's an absolute monster, they're going to get after the quarterback, right? 53% pass rush win rate. That's good for 6th overall. I think you're going to see huge improvement in that because who are they going up against? A bad Denver offensive line that was blocking that same rate, right? The other side of the coin, 55% they were giving up pass rush win rate, right? So the offensive line is not winning at that mesh point. The Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line is. They're going to get after the quarterback. They're going to get after Bo Nix. And this one is going to be ugly again. I could see another 18-10, right? Mid-teens to low single digits kind of mess here that you're going to get in this one. This total sitting at 36.5. When you see numbers like this, 36.5, 38.5, 39, right? That's telling you that this game can get ugly fast, right? It's telling you what the scheme is going to be. It's telling you how it's going to play out. So when I see low, I go lower, and this is a perfect example.
Yeah, I agree. When I had capped this midweek, I didn't have a lot of detailed analysis on this game, but I did have written down here under is notable. And I think the opening line, I'm not entirely sure at what point the open was because some databases have opening lines from like May,
right? Which
you can't even necessarily – is it really the opening line? Like, did things move around in the summertime? So I don't even know truly if it was the opening line or whatever, but I did see 40.5 and, of course, steamed down to 36.5. But I totally agree. Neither team has much on offense. Great defenses. I would take the under if I was playing this game. Guns, any comments?
Pittsburgh didn't score a touchdown last week, and they won 18-10. Okay?
Didn't need to.
Six field goals. This team offensively is not good. All right. Granted, you can give all the credit in the world, and we continue to talk about this team. I think this is 2 years running right now. Pittsburgh, great defense, bad offense. And it continues in this game. Denver on the other side, yeah, you're right. They got beat. They got punished on the offensive line. A lot of pass rushes in this one. But if there's any quarterback, in my opinion, that is the most polished out of all the rookie quarterbacks and the most game ready, pro ready to play is Bo Nix. Bo Nix showed it in the preseason. He looked crisp. He looked like he knew the plays. He knew the intangibles, the changes in this one. But going into game one, going into your first game of your career, and you have to go into Seattle where the 12th man is thumping and the noise is going. It's hard to get the cadences down. It's hard to do audibles. Nobody's hearing you. Trying to hear through the headset, covering your ears. It's a tough place to play. Now you get to go play a home game. Highly motivational spot here for Denver. Pittsburgh, they're just going to rely heavily on TJ Watt. He just is a game changer. He makes everything a problem for every single offense, and it's remarkable that one singular player on a defensive side, if he's not in the game, that defense changes dramatically. This one, like I said, is probably looking towards the under. I was like, you want some trends on this one? Historically, the home team when these two teams meet 6-0 straight up in ATS. Granted, there's a lot of turnover in those statistics in there, but I brought up the point when I said it earlier. Pittsburgh has an average margin of victory in all their wins is 7.4 points per game. Teasing this thing up, if you can find it, if it's, I think the line's at 2.5, 3. It's a very short line, but if you can tease that up 6 points, get it past the 7, and get 8, 9 on that one, I think that's great to put on a teaser card for Denver, knowing that the fact that 10 out of the last 11 Pittsburgh's victories have won by a possession or less. So that's probably the way I'd take it, is take Denver, put it on a teaser card, and yeah, that's how I do it.
Yeah, I mean, I was on X this week seeing a lot of contrarians on Denver. So I think there's a lot of sharp-minded people on Denver here. I don't think Pittsburgh is an easy read, though, because 6 field goals, but they did move the ball reasonably well. And, of course, Justin Fields is an incredibly athletic running quarterback. I mean, I believe the guy averages over 50 yards per game on the ground in his career, something like that. So he's going to get out in the open field and run. And obviously, when you get 6 field goals, it does mean you were in plus territory very often. They just didn't convert. So it's just a lot of moving parts. It's obviously new quarterbacks for both teams. It's just going to be a very questionable game. But the under would be the best side, and an official from the odds fellow. 2 more 4 o'clock games. Let's go 425 here. Big football, big time football. Bengals at Chiefs down at Arrowhead. The conversation here, I think, is truly, are either of these teams going to perform well early season? We've talked about this week after week. Cincinnati doesn't play good football until the second half of the season. And now there's all sorts of reports that Jamar Chase is not going to sign a contract all year, may not re-sign in the offseason because he's insulted by the way they handled the situation. And I think you're finding another coach who is maybe not a great coach. A lot of these coaches are good coordinators and they have very good scheme, but they're not great leaders. And I think when you see a team like Cincinnati come out year after year so flat, it speaks to a lack of leadership at the head coaching position. And they go into Arrowhead where they lost last year 25-17. Key point there, Joe Burrow didn't play in the game. They had a backup quarterback in there, Browning. A lot of moving parts in this game. Guys, you got anything on this one?
Not a lot on that one. Skip my cap altogether. Just gonna be a good matchup. Nothing I'm gonna be betting on for sure. I'm just gonna watch and have a bevy.
For me, I think it's a heavy lean towards the Bengals, which sounds crazy, right? I just think you don't underestimate how sleepy the Chiefs might be. Now, the other side of that, I think, is the problem. If I had a maybe coming off a loss, motivated Bengals team that I knew was clicking on all cylinders. And that's the hesitation, right? That's what you don't have here. Joe Burrow, maybe not that healthy, a weird wrist injury, the Jamar Chase noise, defense that really dropped off a little bit last year and kind of has to re-find its footing. But the talent's there, right? The pedigree's there. They've had a deep run. They made it to the Super Bowl. Even with Browning playing in a spot last year, I thought Browning played well. Kind of kept that team together, gave Joe Burrow that chance to kind of take a step back and see what else was going on. So I'd love to see the Bengals get going here. Could be a spot where the Chiefs let up a little bit. For me, it's another teaser leg option because I think you're getting it up closer to even like 2 scores, which is very appealing in what I think is going to be a kind of a tighter game, probably a little bit of weird back and forth. These teams start sluggish, not only in terms of the early season stuff we've seen, but think about how the Chiefs historically, even the last few years, have kind of come out. Sometimes they're not really waking up till that mid-third quarter or that second half kickoff. So lean Bengals for me, but a lot of noise on both sides.
Keep in mind, though, too, with the Bengals, I want to see a 4-game sample size without their OC there.
Yeah.
You said you mentioned that even with Burrow gone last year, that offense
big
still
part of it, yeah.
had momentum. I think that was more of a coaching than it was the players. And then of course the media is playing up. Oh, Burrow's hurt. His wrist is so that kind of goes okay. I want to take the Bengals because if you're playing this up as much as you are, okay. And really, KC shouldn't have won that match that game last week, in my opinion. I think Lamar Jackson overthrew a guy wide open in the end zone. That's one spot, and of course, Lively not getting his toe in. He should have wore white shoes, not black shoes, and we would have had a touchdown on that one. But I digress. Tough spot. I hate the 6.5. I wish it was lower because that would give me an indicator that it would probably be a Bengals play. But yeah, that's one I'm just not going to touch at all.
Yeah, I don't have much on this. Small lean, maybe to the over. I think it's a contrarian over. I think a lot of people probably like the under here, assuming that Cincinnati can't score the ball. KC plays good defense now. That's become the narrative with the Chiefs is now they're a defensive team. But I think if you look at week 1, 27-20, the Chiefs game obviously did push around 47. But as Guns mentioned, we're talking about like a half an inch between the game cover changing and the total going over. And if you look at the last time these teams did play, it was the back end of last year. I believe it was New Year's Eve, something like that in Kansas City. The final score was 25-17, but Kansas City kicked 6 field goals in that game. So a lot of yards, 373 yards, just couldn't get the ball in the end zone. And we saw this in week 1. They're trying to get Xavier Worthy involved. The guy's obviously a speedster, and they're trying to open up their offense. I mean, they won a Super Bowl last year without a lot of offense, which I think Mahomes is not thrilled with at all. So I think if you're looking at Cincinnati coming off of a 10-point effort at home, since KC obviously putting up 27 in week 1, I think the over is probably a look here, but it's going to be tough stuff. Final 4 o'clock game, divisional football, Rams at Cardinals. Guns and I were talking about this midweek too, and we couldn't figure this one out as to why the market's all over the Cardinals. I could only speculate that they're expecting some sort of reversal. The Rams have dominated this matchup for years. And as we mentioned with the Niners handicap, the Rams have a look ahead to the Niners. And the Rams are coming on a road back-to-back off a real tight, hard-fought loss Sunday night in Detroit. So it does take on, for the Rams, a similar trap environment to what Guns said about San Francisco. So I think that's why it's probably getting steamed on the Arizona side. I don't know. Guns, any comments?
Yeah, I'm not taking Arizona. Come on. Arizona, this is what we did last year, is basically fade Arizona inside the division, and I would continue to do it. I don't care what the market's telling me on this one. The fact that the Rams are a dog on this one may be predicated on a lot of injuries, especially on the O-line and stuff. So there's adjustments there. But I thought they played well against Detroit, regardless of the situation. But Arizona's 2-10 ATS versus division opponents is 2022. The Rams are actually great versus divisional opponents, 8-4 ATS since 2022. And the Rams just own the Cardinals. 14-2 straight up in ATS, dating back to 2016. And the home team is 1-6 straight up ATS since 2021. This is not a team that I wasn't impressed with the Cardinals last week. Granted, they did have the lead in the first half, but I felt they felt off the map. Murray, as a missing wide open Marvin Harrison Jr., there was nobody on the planet guarding him, and he was rolling out that way. And how you not see him and just do that? I don't understand him as a quarterback. I don't think he ever read a playbook. I don't think he ever watches film. I think they need to figure out if this is a bad season for the Arizona Cardinals, it's time to go get a quarterback and get rid of him. Whatever he's doing there is unimpressive at best. He is an electric athlete when he's at his best. But in this situation, you're going against a Rams team that just historically owns you. The market's telling one story. Or the opposite story, but there's only one way to play this, in my opinion. You take the Rams, you pass.
Yeah, Anthony, anything on this one?
Probably a little bit of disagreement just to see if we can get any regression against that. And do you get more of what the Cardinals looked like in the first half versus the second half with a little bit more explosiveness? I'd worry about the defense and how McVay can scheme against them. But the biggest problem for McVay and the Rams and why I don't think this one is tough to touch, there's a ton on both sides, right? Regression and continued dominance. I think with the Rams, they are banged up, right? A lot of injuries, especially along the offensive line. And you see how that goes. But hey, they battle. And I think McVay, when you talk about the coaching, we talk about coaching going the other way. McVay's the polar opposite, right? He has these guys in positions to play. They were supposed to be very bad last year, and look where the Rams ended up. So, a lot of stories on both sides. I want to see how the division matchup plays out. This will be an interesting one when we do the boomerang, right, back around, because these teams play each other again. You'll get a lot of data, and I think a lot of telling signs off of what Vegas does with it and the data that we get from the first game.
Yeah. So I think a lot of contrary points on both sides of that game. Best of luck if you're betting that game. Final game today, 8:20 p.m., late night, Sunday Night Football, taking Houston officially at -6. And this is another game where we're expecting a significant reversal from what we saw in week 1, most specifically with Chicago. Chicago falls into the same camp as New England, in my opinion. If you look at what Chicago did last week, if you just drop down on the planet and you saw a 24-17 win, you'd say, wow, Caleb Williams, first start as a favorite. He covered, he played well, impressive win, this and that. Not even close. The offense could do absolutely nothing in the game. Only 148 yards of total offense, totally propped up by a blocked punt for a touchdown and a 43-yard pick six, as we mentioned before. Will Levis, just a really, really ignorant shovel pass across the field, just basically giving them a touchdown. Chicago was incredibly unimpressive, and it doesn't get any easier here at all. Houston at home with C.J. Stroud last year, outside of the division, including a playoff blowout of Cleveland in the opening round. They were 5-1 ATS in this spot. Their only non-cover came against Tampa Bay, a game they were laying 2.5 points and it won by 2 on the number, 39-37. Even that game where they didn't cover, they dominated Tampa Bay in the yardage, 496 to 332. Could have very well clean swept this environment at home last year. And I think the psychology of the matchup really speaks to the home team here. I think DeMeco Ryans is a very good young coach. We sit here and talk about these coaches that can't juice their guys up. Well, I think DeMeco absolutely can. Ex-linebacker for this team going back about 15 years. And truthfully, I don't think Eberflus is a great head coach. I think people watch Hard Knocks. I think he seems like a good guy. This is a team that with Justin Fields last year underachieved massively and did not perform particularly well on the road. And I think C.J. Stroud has the mind of an athlete 10 years his senior. He's very mature. And I think there's a specific motivation in the game, too. I think CJ will want to lay down the law against Caleb Williams. The narrative has been more so about Caleb Williams this offseason than CJ Stroud. I think Stroud's going to have very specific motivation tonight to really turn up against Caleb Williams. Love this line number. Very strong stuff for Houston at home, laying almost a touchdown. And Houston off a non-cover, a backdoor last week in Indianapolis, 29-27. So you get a buy low statistically on Houston. You get where they function great, and you get a great sell point. Chicago 1-0 ATS, but not representative in any context. Love this play. Last play of this card, Houston -6 tonight. Monday Night Football on Monday. We will figure that one out going forward. Philadelphia hosting Atlanta. A lot going on in that game tomorrow, but tons of plays here. An hour and 10 in the books. Week 2, the Extra Points NFL show right here, Sharky Waters Nation. 9 words of lifestyle. Ride the wave or get out of the water. My 5 top plays: Baltimore -8, Chargers -4.5, Jets first half -2.5, Seattle -3, and Houston -6. The gun, Minnesota +4.5, Baltimore first half -5.5, and Giants, hold your nose, on the money line +108. Anthony, with 6 plays, Jets first half alignment, Baltimore first half alignment, Washington -1.5, Chargers, Carolina under 38.5, Green Bay, Indianapolis under 41, and Pittsburgh, Denver under 36.5. We say it every week. You got 100 options to watch in the NFL. It's a competitive media marketplace. We love to bring you guys the top content, hype, analysis, and picks. A pleasure doing business with you two gentlemen. As always, we will be back next week at 10 a.m. on Sunday, I believe. Anthony, a pleasure. Guns, close them out with some words, and let's dominate.
Oh, you beautiful bastards. We have 1,400 views. You guys watching us live here on a beautiful Sunday. We appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate all the people in the chat joining us. Of course, Sox Nation. Go Irish, baby. And he loves the Bears today, and he is mad at the Shark for calling out his coach, Eberflus. But I tend to agree. We'll see what happens along this season. And everybody in the chat that joined, Cliff, Trap Guard, Free Mind, First Generation Millionaires, James, Santangelo. There we go. I got to learn to read. Ryan Shaw, and of course, everybody else that joined on this beautiful Sunday. We appreciate you all. That's going to do it here for the Extra Points NFL show. And make sure you like and subscribe to the Shark Water Station channel, the Guns Picks channel, and whatever Oddfellow is doing in his free time. If he's not coaching flag football, do that as well. So that's going to do it here. Let's cash some tickets. Let's dominate the board. And as always, let's keep dancing. Bang.